A baby crawled straight toward a caged German shepherd no one else cared to see. Seconds later, the dog lifted his head, and what happened between them brought an entire neighborhood to tears. This is the story of how one tiny hand saved a forgotten life. Dressed in a blue onesie, he looked like any other curious toddler eager to explore. A few feet away, unnoticed at first, sat a large metal cage. Inside, a German shepherd lay curled up, his thick fur pressed to the bars. His ears flicked when Noah's tiny footsteps padded across the porch. But he didn't move. He only watched. Noah's gaze caught the dog's dark eyes, and something seemed to spark in his young mind. He let out a small, delighted squeal and plopped down onto the grass. Inch by inch, he scooted forward, drawn by the silent figure in the cage. In that sleepy morning light, it looked almost peaceful, a baby crawling to greet a dog. No one knew yet how much heartache and hope lurked behind those steel bars. Noah stopped just inches from the cage, his chubby hands pressing into the grass for balance. He tilted his head curiously, studying the big dog on the other side of the bars. The German shepherd lifted his head a little higher. His eyes were tired, edged with sadness, but there was no trace of anger or fear. Only quiet resignation, as if he'd been waiting for something he couldn't name for a long moment. Neither moved. The morning breeze stirred the fur along the dog's back and tousled Noah's fine hair. Then, with the complete trust only a child could have, Noah reached out. His small fingers slipped through the bars and brushed the dog's nose. The shepherd flinched, just barely, then let out a slow, shuddering breath. His tail moved a fraction, giving the tiniest, hopeful wag. From across the street, Mrs. Langley peered over her fence. She held a hand to her mouth, watching in disbelief. She had never seen that dog respond to anyone. Noah giggled and patted the shepherd's muzzle again, as if he already understood the lonely creature needed a friend. In that quiet yard, it was the first sign that hope wasn't lost. Noah's mother, Claire, stepped out onto the porch with a cup of coffee balanced in one hand. She paused mid-sip when she saw her son crouched near the old cage. For a heartbeat, she didn't understand what she was seeing. Then her heart lurched. She set the cup down so hard it sloshed over the rim and hurried down the steps. "Noah," she called, voice breaking with panic. "Sweetheart, come away from there." But Noah didn't even flinch. He kept his hand pressed against the dog's nose, babbling in soft, curious sounds. The German shepherd stayed perfectly still, only his eyes shifting to meet Claire's. They were deep brown, sad, and strangely gentle. She reached her son and scooped him up, expecting the dog to bark or snap. Instead, he lowered his head as if ashamed. "It's okay," she whispered automatically, even though she wasn't sure who she was comforting, her baby or the animal behind the bars. Noah squirmed in her arms, straining to reach the cage again. His tiny hand stretched out, palm open. The dog pressed his nose forward, just close enough that their fingers and whiskers touched through the metal. Claire swallowed the lump in her throat. She realized then that the shepherd wasn't dangerous. He was just waiting for someone to remember he mattered. Claire carefully carried Noah back up the steps, her heart still hammering in her chest. She grabbed her phone from the kitchen counter and dialed animal control with trembling fingers. When the officer arrived, he approached the cage slowly, speaking in a low, reassuring voice. He slipped a scanner from his belt and waved it over the dog's neck. A small beep sounded, and he checked the device's screen. "He's chipped," the officer said quietly. "His name's Shadow. He was registered as a service dog, retired 3 years ago." Claire's brows knitted together. "A service dog? Why would anyone leave him like this?" The officer sighed. "It happens more often than you'd think. Sometimes people can't afford care anymore. Sometimes they just don't want the responsibility." Shadow watched them with solemn eyes. At the mention of his name, his ears lifted a little, as if he was remembering who he used to be. Noah wriggled in Claire's arms, reaching down again. The moment his hand brushed the bars, Shadow's tail thumped softly against the crate floor. That simple wag felt like a promise. He hadn't given up hope, even after everything. The officer stepped aside to radio the shelter, but Claire didn't move. She couldn't look away from the dog's quiet, pleading eyes. Noah leaned out of her arms again, determined. His little fingers slipped through the bars and patted Shadow's cheek. This time, the dog didn't flinch. He inched forward, resting the side of his face against the baby's hand like it was the gentlest thing he'd ever felt. For a moment, the yard seemed to hold its breath. The neighbor, Mrs. Langley, came over carrying an old mixing bowl filled with water. "Here, dear," she murmured, setting it beside the cage. "He looks so thirsty." Claire thanked her softly, her voice thick. She crouched to set Noah down, and together, they watched Shadow lap at the water with slow, grateful gulps. When he finished, he lifted his head and looked right at Noah. The baby smiled, a gummy, sunshine grin, and babbled something no one could understand. But Shadow seemed to. His ears perked, and for the first time all morning, a spark of life returned to his eyes. Claire felt something twist in her chest, an ache that was equal parts sorrow and hope that it was obvious to everyone now. Somehow, in the simplest way, her baby had given this dog a reason to believe again. The shelter truck pulled up to the curb just after noon. 2 workers climbed out, carrying clipboards and soft nylon leads. They approached the cage carefully. Speaking in low voices, Claire held Noah close as he squirmed to get down. His little arms reached out toward Shadow, and a small, desperate wail burst from his lips when the workers unlatched the cage door. Shadow hesitated in the doorway, his big paws planted firmly on the crate floor. Then he looked up, past the uniforms and the open van, and fixed his gaze on Noah. Slowly, he stepped out, one careful foot at a time. Instead of going toward the truck, he pressed his head against Noah's tiny chest. For a moment, no one said a word. Even the workers seemed frozen, caught in the quiet power of that simple act. One of the shelter workers cleared his throat, blinking fast. "Ma'am, if you'd like, you can file to foster him," he said gently. Given the circumstances, it might be the best thing for both of them. Claire looked down at Noah, who had wrapped both arms around Shadow's neck in a clumsy hug. The dog didn't pull away. He closed his eyes, letting out a sigh that sounded almost like relief. "I'd like that," she whispered, voice breaking. "I think he already chose us." A week later, Shadow lay stretched out on a soft blanket in the living room, a fresh bowl of water by his side. Noah sat beside him, babbling and patting his fur with sleepy little hands. When Claire peeked around the corner, she saw them both drifting off to sleep, their heads pressed together in perfect trust. Sometimes, the most unexpected friendships begin in silence. No one could have guessed that a lonely dog in a cage and a baby barely old enough to walk would heal each other in a single morning. Shadow had been waiting for a reason to hope again. Noah gave it to him without asking for anything in return. That night, as Claire turned out the lights, she paused to watch them sleeping together. And for the first time in a long while, she knew their house wasn't just full, it was whole.